Hi, friends, and welcome to another episode of your Bish Therapist podcast. Today is going to be a jam-packed episode because I'm going to be recapping Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, and Real Housewives of New York. Now, Real Housewives of New York, people haven't been the greatest fans of, but I'm going to talk about some things that I think are worthwhile and interesting, and hopefully will be validating to people who want who want their old cast back. But so Real Housewives of Beverly Hills came back with a bang, baby. Oh my gosh. Someone asked me on an Instagram, Ask Me Anything, what franchise I would love to be on. And the answer was Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. Because number one, those ladies are rich, honey. They are rich. And especially the new additions of Jennifer Tilly. Jennifer Tilly is an amazing actress. She is an amazing poker player. She was married to a very rich person and got divorced. And so what people don't realize about Jennifer Tilly is she's very much like Sutton in terms of, you know, they did a lot before and they're very accomplished. They also happen to marry rich men and make out extraordinarily well in divorces, which good for them. The addition of Boz, I love these two newbies. And what I love about Real Housewives of Beverly Hills that you don't see on other franchises, the newbies are usually pretty great in some way, shape, or form. So Boz is literally a boss bitch. She is so accomplished, already retired. She looks so youthful and just beautiful, wonderful fashion. Oh, Jennifer Tilly is just, I absolutely adore her. And the thing is that Jennifer Tilly and Sutton, they're real friends, which I really love. Because for those who don't remember, Jennifer Tilly she kind of guested or filmed, I guess, with Sutton on a couple of episodes past. And, another fun fact, Jennifer Tilly used to go on Jeff Lewis's show, but she got so trolled by people, which is not at all surprising to me because sometimes the world can be a nightmare, but she's kooky. She's funny. She talks fast. she has this wonderful voice. So I just love her and I don't agree with people trolling her. I just think she's a different kooky kind of gal and I just love her. And of course, Sutton, Sutton, I was always on the fence about Sutton, in Real Housewives Beverly Hills past, but it's kind of like you have to get to know her to understand. She has this kind of dry, sarcastic Southern wit that I personally did not necessarily appreciate, but I do now. I think Sutton is fabulous. Her party was fabulous. I mean, again, and that's the thing you get with Beverly Hills. When you have people with real money, you get real awesome parties. You get real awesome trips. You get all these things. And so to me, the first episode coming back, I was like, it's back, baby. I'm so happy. The other interesting thing that I noticed as soon as we came back is that in the first scene with Dorit talking to Erica about her and PK separating, Erica clutched her pearls like the wonderful actress that she is, because, let's not forget, Erica called this long ago. And I will talk about that more. But what I want to say is that Erica seems to have empathy. And I was like, ooh. And Erica, who is not continually talking about Tom Girardi, the divorce, the money, the earrings, and Erica, who is empathetic, and Erica, who is kind and a listener, and an Erica who made a joke right off the bat about it was kind of a self-deprecating joke about it's not just all about her. And I'm like, huh, okay, I can get down with this Erica too. because I liked Erica when she came on the scene. I didn't like what happened with the Tom Girardi stuff. I didn't like how she behaved like most other people. And, I guess maybe we're going to get to see a happier Erica. Erica is in therapy. She's on antidepressants. And I'm telling you, that stuff can make all the difference because she does seem genuinely happier. I give her a lot of credit because that's just pretty wonderful. Garcelle is in her powerhouse era, honey. She is doing all of these amazing movies, but advocating at the same time, because in this country, not only do we have a misogyny problem where, women go missing and really nobody cares. When those women are women of color, Black and brown women specifically, there is even less media attention and less attention to it in general, which is just, gross. So Garcelle really, she's making movies and she's doing all these things, but she really is doing advocacy behind the scenes. And I just love every minute of that. Dorit is in her takedown era. Like, Dorit has found her voice. And while she's still talking too much, she is pissed. And she is in her takedown era. She is going to take down, it seems like, Kyle and pretty much the rest of the cast, except for Boz, it seems like. So I can't wait to see that. And finally, Kyle has been, I think, the only original housewife left of a franchise that is still running. Teresa Giudice would have been that, but, Jersey's on pause and who knows what they're actually doing with it. So Kyle really is the only OG left, and she's never had a takedown season. And guess what, honeys? This is it. This is her takedown era is upon us, which, here's the thing. I adore Kyle Richards, and I will say I do owe some of my success to her, because what I will say, and this is just to, be honest about potential bias on my perspective. When I was first starting out last year, I did a clinical interpretation of stuff that I felt like was going on with Kyle due to, the death of the sudden and tragic death of her friend Lorene. And this was during the whole Morgan Wade craziness. I posted something and she reposted it saying, what this person is saying is correct and go read it. And I got 4,000 followers overnight because I've been reposted before, but normally now no one cares. Follows are very hard to get. I just had 600,000 people view my page this month and got maybe 10 new followers. So I am grateful to Kyle for giving me that stepping stone, because it really took me from an account that was, I think I had like 5,000 followers to then it took me to close to 10. And, the thing about how that works online is that the more followers you have, the more people actually want to follow you, which is wild. And I don't know. It's also sometimes inauthentic because the number of follows or likes or whatever, it doesn't define you. But on the internet, it is important. I just want to say that I personally really like Kyle. I understand that people feel like she is manipulative, and it sounds like Dorit is saying that she's manipulative. And, people who don't like Kyle are just really excited for her takedown. And I'm going to be honest, I'm never excited for anyone's takedown. I don't want people to be taken down. Maybe I want them off my screens, like Alexis. I never want to see her again, but I don't wish her harm. I don't, I just don't want to watch her anymore. So I think that sometimes when it comes to certain housewives, Kyle elicits people who they call her vile Kyle and all these things. And it's like, listen, we all have good and bad parts. In my personal perspective, Kyle, we all can be manipulative. So can she be manipulative? Yeah, sure. Does she say unkind things? Yes. But I think she gets an inordinate amount of hate over other housewives. So that's something that I'm going to be continuing to talk about with Beverly Hills. And then Kathy Hilton's return as the kooky confidant is just like, it was like, chef's kiss all over the place, just chef's kiss, top to tail. And Kathy going to be Dorit's confidant also, which is very, speaking of manipulative, it's like, well, I'm going to get into this, but I do think that some of Dorit's relationship with Kathy is to get back at Kyle and cause her some pain. And so I guess what I'm saying is these women, they point a lot of fingers at each other, but they're all guilty of doing very similar things. So the episode starts with, as I mentioned, Dorit bluntly telling Erica, PK and I have agreed to separate. And then, she clutches her pearls, does the empathy thing, which was beautiful. And then, cut to footage of Erica calling this out at BravoCon years before. And remember last season, Dorit, this is what's so funny to me is that we've now seen this happen enough where someone will fiercely defend their marriage or their relationship, and then next season we see that it's falling apart, has fallen apart, whatever. So there is some truth to, thou doth protest too much when, if someone's saying something and you're like, oh no, this isn't really there is some truth to that. But also, what I want to say is that when your relationship is falling apart, a lot of times you don't know what's happening. Like Kyle last year, Dorit last year, to give them some grace. When you don't know what's happening and you're scared and you're embarrassed and you're feeling all of these awful things, it's, how do you say that? And then you're on TV. And so I understand why this happens. But, Erica did call this out at BravoCon years ago. Dorit said, we've had a rough couple of years. PK's always been a drinker, but over the years, it's gotten progressively worse. Little fights would turn into blow-ups, and we would be in the gutter screaming at each other. Dorit claims that she told PK that he needed to dry up, leading PK to realize that he had a problem with alcohol and set off on a sobriety journey. So since then, PK has announced that he is sober and that he is working on his sobriety journey. And, bravo. I think that, you could see last year that they were both very unhappy. And I called him out last year for some of the egregious things he said about PTSD, which I stand by. But I always will cheer someone on who is working on bettering their life, no matter how big of an asshole they've been, because we can all be assholes, right? And so all we can do is do better once we know better. And so the problem comes in here for a lot of folks when Dorit starts talking about his recovery. And so I'm going to give my 2 cents on this. But Dorit says he's a full-blown alcoholic and shares that he has a sober coach and is working the 12-step program. So Dorit absolutely has the right to discuss how his drinking or his recovery is impacting her. However, I feel that this initial conversation, it just rubbed me the wrong way and a lot of other people because, perhaps Dorit has not heard of the whole anonymous part of PK's program, right? When you're in a 12-step program, AA, NA, there's a lot of different 12-step programs now. They really say 12-step programs, it's not for TV, it's not for radio. The 12 traditions are private and there's a reason for that. However, it's also great to discuss a sobriety journey. So admittedly, there is a fine line of how to do that respectfully, not only respecting PK, but respecting everybody else in these programs, that the anonymity is important, the privacy is important. And if you're not a member of that group, talking about it can really ruffle some feathers. People said, I got a lot of people saying, yes, this is how I feel on my Instagram. And some other people said, well, maybe, he gave her permission and, they both have to keep their jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And listen, I don't want anyone necessarily to lose their job. I understand people need to make a living. And this is what it is for some of these housewives. But I do still stand on my belief is that his recovery is for him to discuss. And she just needs to be mindful about how okay, I'm going to be really clear because I'm kind of beating around the bush. I feel like Dorit is using his alcoholism as a way to blame him for all of their issues and struggles to take accountability for her stuff. That's how I feel. I think that, PK, it was interesting. He says he got sober and he realized he was harboring anger and resentment towards Dorit due to her poor listening skills and pressure to keep her in an elite lifestyle. PK realized he cannot recover in this space with his wife, which is quite significant. When people get sober, there's a saying in the program, you have to be aware of people, places, and things that are triggering. For people who are in a marriage and they get sober, there is a lot of reevaluating that relationship that has to come with the program, because it's like the relationship was sick. If one person in the relationship is sick, the relationship is sick. And then when one or both parties get well, it's really redefining, what does this relationship mean? How do we trigger each other? How have we done that in the past? How do we work through that now? It really is a rebirth of a brand new relationship. And it's a lot for the person who's not in recovery, for the family member who's going along for the ride. And for people like that, I always recommend Al-Anon. I've attended Al-Anon meetings myself. They're for family members who grew up or love someone with an addiction, specifically alcoholism, usually for Al-Anon, but it's for family members who are impacted, but they're not struggling with the addiction themselves. And I can tell that Dorit has probably not attended any of those meetings, but this PK feeling like he could not recover in the space, and he got an apartment. So it tells me, number one, he's taking his sobriety seriously, because people who do take their sobriety seriously will make significant steps to get better, that even though they're painful initially and they're really jarring initially. So that tells me he is taking his recovery seriously, which wonderful. So super proud of him. And it also tells me that he feels Dorit is an impediment to his recovery somehow. And what I find interesting is that Dorit, her listening skills have really come under fire, I want to say pretty much every season that she's been on. And so what frustrates me about Dorit, and I think probably frustrates PK too, is that she just talks so much and listens not enough. And you can't really sustain a long-term intimate relationship like that. You can't. It requires back and forth, listening and communicating. And I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, because Dorit actually went on Watch What Happens Live after the premiere episode. And I just observed the same shit. And I just felt so annoyed that it's like, you got to listen. But let's move on to Kyle is officially separated, watching her children leave the nest, and examining her sexual identity. She said, "This is not what I expected my life to be." And sometimes the idea we have in our head of how it's supposed to be is what messes us up the most. Her grief was palpable, and I relate very much to it. This is not what I thought my life was going to be. I am 44 years old. I have the body of an elderly sloth and the mind of a type A perfectionist. This is not what I thought my life was going to be. I thought I'd own a private practice, and I thought I'd be a therapist until I died. And life threw me some curveballs, and I pivoted, as Ross would say, pivot. Pivot. Friends reference for those who don't get that. But, we have a picture of how things are supposed to go, and then we have to pivot. And if we don't, it can be miserable. But the process of pivoting and letting go of that picture, there's a lot of grief in that. And so I just felt like Kyle's grief was palpable. She went from having this house full of husband and kids, and now her kids are all gone except for Portia, who is going to be gone soon too, I assume, because she's, of the age of going to college or, going off on her own. You could just tell it was like Kyle's in this house. She's alone. I just felt that there was a palpable sadness to it. But what was really interesting is Kyle addresses the Morgan Wade rumors directly, denying that they're together, but admitting I'm still figuring things out. I've never questioned my sexuality in my life, and the speculation did make me think twice. It was devastating watching Kyle cry, admitting that she was worried her children would feel embarrassed or angry of her for questioning or exploring sexual identity. And that made me so sad. But then it was wonderful seeing the fact that her children showed up for her like she showed up for them and showed her nothing but unconditional love and support. And so I think that, while this family is going through changes, there's such a love and devotion to each other. I think even with Mauricio that I think that they'll fare very well, but in this process, I'm sure it's just so painful. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about how all stages of development can be challenging and sexual identity is complex and an ever-changing process. So, there are folks that for one reason or another, you grow up, you hear certain messages. Kyle's mother was married several times to a couple different men. And, just because when people grew up, it wasn't necessarily seen as acceptable, that doesn't mean that people don't experience these developmental changes and shifts. And at any age, it's not just, when you're a kid or you're a teenager, we continue to develop throughout our lifespan. There are stages of development that are taught within the field of psychology, and they last until death. And so I think that when people grow out of being a child or an adolescent or a young adult, everyone just forgets that there's still psychological changes and underpinnings going on for people. So I'm just here to remind people of that, number one. And number two, sexual fluidity is the idea that sexual orientation and desire can change over time or in different situations. Sexual orientation is not black and white, and it has three main components. One is sexual attraction, two is sexual behavior, and three is sexual identity. Sexual identity is your sense of self in relation to your sexuality. As such, it encompasses many components, including gender identity, sexual orientation, and sexual orientation is the term used in regard to who you are attracted to sexually and romantically. And then, there's complex pieces in there where sometimes people who are asexual, it's not so much a sexual component, it's a romantic component, it's a love component. And so my point is that society likes to put people into categories, but in reality, that's not where most humans exist. And the LGBTQIA plus spectrum is a spectrum. It's vast, it's wide. We cannot put people into gay, straight, bisexual. We cannot put people into these boxes. It's just, that's not where humans live. And so I apologize if this got a little bit teachy, but I just wanted to be clear about the fact that, I said last year, you can't bully anybody into understanding their sexual identity or development or exploring that. Like, I think Kyle was genuinely confused and exploring some things, and the whole world was screaming at her while she was doing it. And I just said this so many times last year, and I'll say it again, is you can't bully someone into figuring out their sexual identity. In fact, it does the opposite. And I, in my opinion, see a Kyle who is sad, grief-stricken. I feel that maybe there's a low level of dysthymia there, which dysthymia is a fancy word for just like sadness that's not quite depression, kind of like Eeyore. Well, no, Eeyore was definitely depressed, but Eeyore would be an example of someone who was dysthymic and depressed. But guess what? Eeyore's friends loved him anyway. And I love that part of that story. But anyway, and so I think that we need to give Kyle time and space to figure out what on earth she wants, what this next phase of her life is going to be. And I think that she deserves grace. And I don't think that she deserves the hate, number one. And number two, in my opinion, I think how some people treated Kyle last season was, it was hateful. It was not homophobic because she doesn't identify as gay, but there was just such a gross piece to it that I was just like, oh my God, I feel like people were like villagers with torches, like chasing her, like, are you gay? Are you not? And it's like, let her figure that out. Take your torches and go home. And then we get to the part where Kyle and Dorit butt heads, which was ironic since Kyle was wearing antlers to this, Sutton's very cool surrealism party or whatever it was. I think a lot of people were confused on the theme, but it was just cool. It was cool. It was different. It wasn't some thing that we've seen on the Housewives a million times. It wasn't a cold plunge or a therapy sound bath, whatever. It was something different and very cool. But so we find out that Kyle and Dorit literally have not spoken since the reunion. And then what happened was Kyle went on an Amazon Prime live and made a really nasty comment about how she and Dorit were never really that close of friends. So she didn't understand why Dorit was so upset anyway, which was really shitty and really rude. That absolutely was uncool because, her and Mo and PK, they all had clearly a close relationship. And so Dorit hurt Kyle, and then Kyle struck back and hurt Dorit, which, as much as I like Kyle, that's not acceptable and that's not cool. And so what Kyle did then started a war where Dorit was like, well, my marriage is falling apart. My best friend now says, who? I don't know her. So Dorit has had it, and she came out guns a-blazing. And we watched this discussion go left fast. Dorit was wide awake, and previews show that she is coming to take Kyle down. And like I said, I think everyone else except for Boz, who clearly already after the first meeting, they have some sort of real connection. And so it's going to be interesting to watch this season where Dorit has allies and Kyle really does not. But so on Watch What Happens Live, Dorit says the crux of the breakdown with Kyle, it was a long time coming, and said that Kyle being angry about the BravoCon stuff was gaslighting. So Dorit said some stuff at BravoCon that upset Kyle, and then Kyle said that's why she said those things on the Amazon Prime or Amazon Live. And so, number one, clearly their relationship has not improved because this was on Watch What Happens Live, which was recent, right? So the season filmed, it's wrapped, whatever. And so as of right now, clearly they're still at odds. And Dorit gave an update on her marriage on Watch What Happens Live saying, quote, "We are friendly communicating." And then she said, divorce is not a topic of conversation. She said that PK has an apartment. He sees the kids on weekends, and the children have adapted well despite not knowing anything about the situation. So here's what frustrates me about this. Their kids are like 9 and 11. Okay. They're not 2 and 3. They're at an age where they're smart enough and adept enough to know what's going on. So what frustrates me is adults treat kids like they're dumb, like they don't know things, but kids are actually way more intuitive. And I would argue emotionally more intelligent than many adults because they haven't had society kind of like strip it from them by shame and saying, oh, you're too sensitive, so strip that. Kids are just little empaths. They're intuitives. They can't be fooled. Okay. And so I don't like when adults say, well, we're doing this for the kids, but in reality, I want to advocate for those kids for a second. While it's well-intentioned, kids are smart and they know something's wrong and they know it's different. And so pretending like nothing's wrong is actually unintentional gaslighting for kids, and it makes them feel really confused. Every situation is different, but in my therapy, when I worked with kids, I was always an advocate for, you got to talk to them about stuff, maybe in different ways, not like you talk to adults, and you do have to plan that, but kids are smart and they know. And so let's stop treating them like they're not. On Watch What Happens Live, Dorit gave a long-winded explanation about how PK's sobriety initially improved their relationship. So at the time of the reunion, when she said their relationship was better than ever, she said she was being sincere because at that time, their relationship was great. But then old resentments bubbled up and created problems, which is a reminder that, first of all, Andy was like, really, you could tell he was getting annoyed because she takes so long to answer a question and she gives so much unnecessary detail that, and watch what happens live. It's very short and it's very like, you could tell behind the scenes that it's like, boom, boom, boom. They can't deal with a very long-winded explanation. And Andy was even getting annoyed with her. And so it's like, if everyone is giving you the same feedback, it's time to listen. It's time to listen when people give you that feedback over and over and over. And two, in all marriages and relationships, unresolved issues will always resurface until the root or roots are properly addressed, both individually and as a couple. So for couples who have the same fight over and over, it's not about the paper towels or the, kitchen counters or whatever you want to think that it's about. It's about 20 years ago when your spouse did X, Y, or Z, and then you felt a certain way and you held on to it. So when someone gets sober, there's a lot of anger and resentment that comes to be, because when someone's anesthetizing themselves with a substance, they don't care about what their spouse is doing. They care about their substance. Figuring out resentments and working through that, it is a process that is really, really important in terms of being able to figure out, can we move forward or does this relationship not serve us anymore? I will be covering Real Housewives of Beverly Hills and Southern Charm. However, as most of you have heard, I'm going to be taking my break. So for now, the episodes are going to be on my Spreaker Supporters Club. So you can check that out anywhere you listen to this podcast. At the end of it, there's a link that says to join Spreaker Supporters Club. You can click that. But no fear. If you do not want to join Spreaker Supporters Club, when I come back in January or early February, I'm not sure yet when I'm coming back, I will release all the episodes for free. People will just be a little bit behind, but if it matters to you, join my Spreaker Supporters Club, and I will continue to be talking about all things Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. So let me move on to Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, because I have some things to say about Bronwyn and Todd. Okay, Bronwyn and Todd's dynamic to me became painfully clear last episode. Watching Todd lecture and admonish Bronwyn about her hysterical behaviors in Palm Springs, it made me angry. It made me really angry. Todd kind of just, he has this way of just like gruffly barking at her. He said, "You ruined a perfectly nice afternoon. I've never seen you act like that. Frankly, it's not very becoming for you." So here's the thing. I've never seen you act like that. What was going on? That's appropriate to talk about, right? If my husband does something wildly out of character, I'd be like, "Hey, bud, what's going on? Like, what I see you behaving differently. I'm concerned. What's happening?" But the way that Todd did it, it was less out of concern and more what I will call misogynistic gaslighting, which is a form of manipulation enforcing patriarchal norms of quote unquote proper feminine behavior. So previously, I gave Todd his gruff behaviors, I gave them grace. Here's my problem. I gaslight myself in this space because my gut is literally never wrong. My gut is never wrong when I listen to it. But being in this space, I'll do an interpretation and people will be like, "Melissa, you're so mean. We don't even know him. And this is a clip and this is 15 minutes. And it's like, okay, that's true. But I have intuition that is spot on and has never failed me. And it was born of survival, which, people don't really know my story, even though I've talked about it some on the podcast. People on Instagram, they don't want to get to know me. They just want to, bark and yell and complain and things like that. But so, I thought at first his gruff behaviors, I gave them grace. And I was like, you know what, Melissa, you don't really know them and blah, blah, blah. But guess what? I am clear in how I feel right now, which is Todd's response was bullshit and I didn't like it at all. I think that Bronwyn, there's different responses, like trauma responses that people can have. And so to me, Bronwyn displayed a fawn response, which is kind of like mimicking a father-daughter dynamic where she's in trouble with him and she's fawning in response, which basically just means people pleasing because she says, Todd's approval might mean everything to me. And so, Bronwyn said that Todd doesn't want her to publicly or privately share her emotions. And honestly, this is a huge problem. It is emotional abandonment, and I imagine that it makes Bronwyn feel very alone, which is unacceptable and unsustainable. In a relationship, your emotional safety is really important in feeling true intimacy and connected. And so if you're with a partner who they feel like certain emotions are unacceptable, well, that's a huge problem because that's just called being human. And then you end up just like changing fundamentally who you are or trying to ignore. And so I think that Todd is incapable of managing his own emotions. And so he projects his discomfort onto Bronwyn. So just because it wasn't acceptable to him doesn't mean it wasn't acceptable. This is kind of like people might call it emotional gatekeeping. And so Todd said, cowboy up and change. That's what he said, which to me is the war cry of emotionally stunted men everywhere. Truly. I was just like, this is so gross to me. I don't like it. I don't like how, Bronwyn seems to. I want to know more about her background because it's so interesting to me why people choose partners who are emotionally unavailable or judgmental or treat them like children. And so what I'll say is people typically who choose emotionally unavailable partners were made to feel that they weren't good enough as children or that they were too much or, like they didn't matter. And so I think little Bronwyn deserves better than she's getting. And if any of this resonates with you, perhaps you do as well. I think a lot of us deserve better than we initially choose for ourselves, because when you're feeling bad about yourself and you're stuck in trauma responses, it's hard to make healthy choices with partners. We sometimes will choose a partner who they match our trauma wounds in ways that we can trigger each other's trauma wounds. And so I will be really interested to see more about this dynamic and be able to talk more about it. But for now, that's kind of my thoughts on that. One thing that really surprised me was Angie K discussing her history growing up with, being 8 years old when her mom died due to the disease of alcoholism. She noted, my mom was self-medicating with alcohol. And although it sounds like Angie's mom passed when she was 8, it sounds like she was absent for years prior due to being in active addiction, which is common, right? When we choose a substance, we're choosing that over our family, over our partners, over ourselves. It's like our mistress. It's our first love. And so all of the important things then fall to the wayside. And, as a result, I think, Angie felt eternally lonely as a child. And as a result, she now overcompensates by being a helicopter mom to her daughter, Electra. And you can see just how hard Angie tries to be the mom that she needed. But typically when we try to overcompensate, we do usually overcorrect, because you can tell Electra, felt a little bit smothered, which, listen, smothered over neglected, that's a good step in the right direction. But at the end of the day, it seemed like it didn't feel good for Angie and it didn't feel good for her daughter, because when we overcorrect due to trauma response, usually it can feel like too much. So I think Angie will find her way. But what I'll say is that in the process of parenting, inner child trauma does get triggered. As our adult self meets the needs of a child, this can accompany grief over our own inner child needs not being met. And it can also cause grief in terms of, wow, this is the age that I was when I experienced this. And then you see a child that age and you realize how young and how vulnerable you were. And it busts through a cognitive dissonance in your head of like, wow, this was really painful and unacceptable. Could I imagine doing this to this child? No, I couldn't. So how could that happen to me? So parenting does stir a lot of that up. And Angie brought up a very important topic, which is she felt like it wasn't okay to be angry with her mom because she's no longer here. But I'm here to tell everyone listening to this, it is okay to be angry with people who've hurt you even after they've died. Sometimes processing trauma means accepting a duality of love and anger, right? And grief is the excruciating cost of love. And it's painful, and it's very complex, and sometimes grieving means feeling the good, bad, and the ugly, means feeling anger at a loved one who has passed for, yes, her mom was sick, but Angie was severely neglected as a result from her mom and didn't get the love that she needed and deserved. So that's also okay to be angry about. It's okay to hold space for multiple things at one time, to honor a loved one while also being angry and saying, I deserve better. So I just want to make sure everybody hears that. Now, Mary's breakfast at Tiffany's party, Mary just has me feeling for her every single week. Someone DM'd me and said that when they heard that I had developed some compassion, that they almost spit out their coffee. But that is my toxic trait, is that once I learn about someone's backstory, it's basically impossible for me to not have empathy. That's just who I am. And so I still stand by, Mary has done some really uncool stuff with the church and all that stuff, but we're getting to see a softer, vulnerable side that, all of us have good and bad parts. And so I'm appreciating the parts of Mary that she's actually being vulnerable and showing. And so the party was planned as a distraction from her powerlessness and grief over watching her son struggle with addiction. And it's common, by the way, to have a desire to maintain excessive control over certain aspects of life when we feel personally out of control in very vulnerable ways, which, going back to Angie K, I think if we have severe traumas and we don't work through that in some way, shape, or form, therapy is a great way, but again, not for all. And so if we don't deal with it, it will come back to impede us throughout our lives. And so I think that Angie's trying to hold on to control with her daughter, but it's kind of like a kid who's like, holding on to a stuffed animal too tight. And it's like, oh, you just strangled that stuffed animal. Well, that's what adults can actually do too. And so at the party, though, it was fascinating because Britani was outraged that she wasn't getting enough attention, and she acted out like a child. And shaming Angie for bringing wine to her home while she's currently drinking alcohol. And Mary, oh my gosh, Mary, or someone said something about how she was, quote unquote, doing 3 different guys. I cackled because, Britani is the type of person who I just personally don't care for in terms of someone who pretends to be pious with their church group, and then they're really, breaking the rules that they claim to be devoutly following. It's just inauthenticity. It's really gross. I get why it happens, but Britani is just, I'm not a fan. And then Mary saying that Jared slid into Mary's DMs was not on my radar. And I need to know more information about this stat. And if we do not hear more about this in next episode, I'm going to be pissed. So let's move on to Heather. Because Heather's on my last nerve. I was never the greatest Heather fan, period. The way she rode for Jen Shah. I'm like, so Jen Shah defrauded elderly people out of life savings that ruined their lives time and time again, over and over and over. And so when Heather stood by her so much, it's like there's a difference between standing by a friend and being like, this behavior is not acceptable. I love you. I don't support this. And Heather I think she made herself look kind of foolish, to be honest. But Heather making fun of Bronwyn was cruel and gross. Heather's jealousy of Bronwyn, in my opinion, is seeping from her pores that she is getting lasered at Laser Lab and Beauty. Heather admits that she lied to everyone about her birthday. Cool. Add it to the long list of stuff that Heather has lied about. Heather lies about everything. The black eye. It's like, part of me, I'm getting this feeling of Heather's trying to make fetch happen, and it's just not happening. Just be a real, authentic person, and then maybe the audience will like you. And then, so Heather tries to embarrass Bronwyn about how she flew home first class, but her guests were in coach. And Bronwyn gave the read of the century when she said, because it was my goddamn credit card, bloop. And that's what you call a Nene Leakes bloop. That's a bloop. And that was the moment I'm just like, you know what? I love Bronwyn because she has the chutzpah to go after Heather, the seasoned housewife that's clearly so jealous of Bronwyn. She's trying to bring Bronwyn down because, in my opinion, I just think, oof, Heather, you're so angry. As Lisa Rinna would say, she's so angry. And I think it comes from jealousy, number one. But in an attempt to skirt accountability, Heather claims that the group was traumatized by Monica Garcia, which is full laugh out loud, because all these women are low down, they dig up stuff on each other. And so it's like, please, let's not feign faux trauma from Monica Garcia when you are all doing this stuff behind the scenes, right? I don't think there's such a thing as an ethical housewife. Some people have done it really well. Cynthia Bailey, for me, is a number one person who comes in mind. She is an ethical housewife. She gives, but also she's like a good person. And, she's not on the show anymore. So, but Bronwyn, to me, it was so fascinating. Bronwyn concedes the battle and graciously offered an apology to Heather and a willingness to move on, which I don't think Heather deserved. But in my opinion, Bronwyn showed exactly why Heather is threatened by her. She's smarter, richer, and younger. Bloop. And I think Heather is extremely threatened by that. And Monica Garcia, Bronwyn gives what Monica Garcia didn't, which is emotional stability and staying on message and just serving stuff with a very kind of cool, calm, and collected demeanor. Monica made mistakes when she would get activated. She would behave like a teenager. And then, women have to behave perfectly to get taken seriously. I'm going to be honest. And that's not cool. And it's not fine. But what I'm saying is that Monica did too much and made herself look like a hysterical woman. But Bronwyn, she is cool, calm, and collected. She is smart. She has a better vocabulary than Heather. And I think Heather is just, I have never seen two newbies get under Heather's skin so much. And I say Heather's meaning Bronwyn gets under Heather's skin from Salt Lake and Katie gets under Heather's skin from OC. And so I just found it fascinating that, Heather is just telling on herself by being so bothered. But then what was hilarious was Britani standing up and throwing a temper tantrum, yelling, "Guys, what about me? Guys." That's literally how she said it, like a whiny little kid. And Bronwyn jokes she needs unconditional love. And I cackled because the accuracy. Britani is a primal scream for attention. And the ironic thing is she doesn't get that this is what keeps people at arm's length. This is why people don't like Britani. This is why she is left out of things. And no one broke the fourth wall, but I think Britani was here being like, I want my screen time too. I want this big makeup. Why am I not involved in this? And everyone just laughed at her. It's because you're doing too much, girl. You're doing too much. You're not authentic. You're putting men and the show over your children. Read the room. No one is feeling this. No one. And then just when we thought it was all over, Meredith pulls some drama out of her Flintstone hairdo, which I think Mary said that. And again, I just cackled because the hairdo was so bad. But Meredith escalated and beat it like a dead horse by playing the podcast audio on her phone, and a yelling match ensued. And here's where I cannot even believe that I'm saying that I agree with Mary. Mary yells at Meredith and Angie K to stop yelling and tells Meredith that she can go if she can't control herself. And I am totally on Mary's side here because it was a more than fair boundary setting. Mary's home is her safety and she felt disrespected. And Mary says to Meredith, "This is not love." Because Meredith was like, "Well, I love you." And she's like, "This is not love. You're yelling in my home. You're not listening to me. You're making me have to give you consequences." And then Meredith What I don't like about what Meredith does is when someone gives her consequences that she needs and deserves, she becomes a huge martyr. And then she'll be like, fine, I'm just leaving then. I'm going, just such drama. And I just, Meredith continually storming out. She's like the new Shannon Storm Spador of Salt Lake City, if I'm being honest. Okay. I think that what I'm going to say is that Salt Lake City is really giving. And I feel that I just am loving everything about the show. The mid-season trailer shows, Mary and her son coming to a breaking point, which I'm very invested in seeing that. And I'm just really interested in seeing how some of this plays out. So one thing that I'll do quickly before I end is talk about the Real Housewives of New York quickly, because there's not a lot to say about it. But I think that the only thing worse than the prank, Rebecca and Aaron's prank, is the fact that everyone was actually in on it because Aaron was actually the leaky pigeon. And watching the group process this was so fascinating. And I actually want to see how this plays out next week. But Rebecca said, we came up with a really funny, harmless rumor. And I was like, what? A, it was not funny. And B, it was not harmless. Sai, I'm actually liking Sai this season. I think she did get therapy and she's learning how to be a better Sai. But she spit facts saying that the joke was tone deaf because there are 3 women in that group who want to be pregnant and says, check your baby privilege at the door. Boom. And I fully agree. Being a woman who's unable to have children, I've had so many egregious things done or said to me, some of them purposeful, some of them not. But pregnancy privilege is real. And the grief of not being able to have a child or multiple children or whatever it is, it's very painful. It's very powerful. And it just goes to show that Aaron and Rebecca have no idea about that privilege. They have no idea. To me, Raquel and Mel are the saving grace of this franchise. And honestly, the only reason that I'm still watching, because I think that they're really great. And Raquel reacted appropriately to this when she was confused and she joked, maybe this is the norm for straight women. And I was like, on behalf of straight women everywhere, let me say this is not the norm and we are also confused. Raquel just continues to be a breath of fresh air. She's saving this franchise single-handedly. And watching Raquel and Mel at the sex shop openly discuss their sex life, in my opinion, was refreshing. And the reason for that is, people get weird about sex, and I'm very sex positive. If you're not harming yourself or anyone else, I think it's a taboo topic that shouldn't be taboo. And Raquel had to shed a lot of internalized guilt and shame to get here, to get to the point of having an engagement party and openly talking about her sex life with Mel in front of cameras. And I am loving this for her. I love when people come to find their true selves and become their true selves unabashedly, loudly. It's just one of the most beautiful things. And to be honest, I think that this franchise would be terrible if it were not for Raquel and Mel. And then the one last thing I wanted to say about Jessel and Pavit is that we see them have a couples therapy session, and I feel like the scene was a microcosm of underlying issues. It starts off with Pavit bringing chips, salsa, and a sandwich to online therapy, which, let me say this. When I was doing virtual therapy, people would do all sorts of wild things, like be driving or eating. And so for me, I had, it's boundary setting in terms of a virtual therapy session is the same as a therapy session. So I don't care if people eat. Personally, every therapist is different. But if people need to use that time to eat, great, do what you got to do. But it should be treated with respect, which I think was what Jessel was saying. So here's the thing. Jessel saw it as rude, but Pavit saw it, in my opinion, as a nod to his therapist's heritage. So the therapist lives in Mexico City, and Jessel chose the therapist because the therapist had an interest in like food and cuisine. And so Pavit and this therapist, in individual sessions, they have this mutually shared appreciation for food that they bonded over. And I think that was why Pavit kind of brought it to therapy. So it was actually kind of like a nod to the therapist. And Jessel just didn't understand it. And so then we kind of see the magic of therapy as the therapist bridges a major communication gap, which is Jessel wanted to discuss having a third child, but Pavit used dry humor, food, and the phrase "we'll see" to avoid any discussion, which just got them into a tug of war. And so the therapist noted, which was super great, and that you can't saying "we'll see" to someone who's your adult partner is just an avoidance strategy that's going to leave your partner angry and frustrated, because this is something that's really important to Jessel. So whether the answer is yes or no, they really have to talk about it. And so the therapist, what it did was bridge that gap to help them talk about it and to help them both see that, whenever you take an extreme stand in a marriage, it's usually not super healthy, because really, I've been in a relationship with my husband now for 23 years, married for 15, and it's all compromise. It's all give and take to maintain a successful long-term relationship. It can't be black and white, yes or no from my end or his end. And so it seemed like Pavit was realizing that, and Jessel needed to realize that too, is that you can't just get everything you want. His feelings matter too, but at least now we can have a conversation. But it was like watching them together, it made me wonder, how on earth did they get together in the first place? They seem like total opposites who do not understand or appreciate the other's communication style. Pavit's dry, sarcastic wit, I think, is like a dead language to Jessel that she just doesn't understand. And I think that's why they have so many problems in their marriage. She doesn't appreciate his communication style. He's kind of a little bit aloof and, just makes jokes, which is, that's okay some of the time, but not all of the time. So hopefully this helps them both move on. And the last thing I do want to note is that Erin talked about her mom, the chemotherapy known as Red Devil. And, Erin kind of said it's the worst nickname. And I just had a little feeling about that, which I want to explain. Red Devil is a nickname for the chemotherapy drug doxorubicin, which is known for its red color. It is red like Kool-Aid, and very severe side effects. So I've gone through chemotherapy. I didn't have this particular drug because for ovarian cancer, the protocol was Taxol and cisplatin. Oh, and by the way, if you're ever wondering if people are faking cancer, just ask them what treatment they're on. And if they don't tell you within 2 seconds and immediately pronounce it right, they're probably lying. I went through chemotherapy when I was 17. And then 15, I was diagnosed with CLL, which I have now, and I've been on immunotherapy for 5 years. The name of my immunotherapy drug is called acalabrutinib. I know how to say it. I know how to spell it. And, so it's a red flag if you ask someone what their treatment is and they're like, that's just saying. I'm preparing to talk about Anatomy of Lies too. So faking cancer is on the brain. So to be clear, no one's faking cancer here. I'm just saying it's a fun fact. But what's important to note is that the cancer community, and there is a large community of us, there's Instagram pages, Facebook pages, online support groups, there's all these different things. We use dark humor to cope. So it may seem like the worst nickname ever, but sometimes for cancer patients, it's more about trying to take our power back and having a laugh in the process. And to some people, it seems horrifying. I don't think Erin meant anything bad by it, but I just wanted to be really clear that we got to have some stuff, right? If we're going through all this and it's hard and it's painful, we got to have a laugh. We got to use dark humor, and that's just how we do it. So that is going to be all for today. Please stay tuned as season 3 is coming to an end. Next week, I am doing an episode with the amazing Mandy Slutsker. And the week after that, I am going to release the season finale of season 3 of Your Bitch Therapist podcast, which is Anatomy of Lies. And that is my signature deep dive. I did a lot of research for that. So please stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for listening. Please don't forget to go follow Your Bitch Therapist podcast, to give a 5-star review if you could be so kind. Follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at Your Bitch Therapist. Please take care of yourselves and each other, and ta-ta for now. Disclaimer. Posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your Bitch Therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions, and posts are my own and not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Greyheart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT podcast and on its social media is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, or hear on YBT podcast or associated social media. Communicating with YBT via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of YBT, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback.